Welcome to another peaceful night of history. Tonight, we will wander gently back through time, farther than the pyramids, farther than any king or queen, to the lands where writing was born, where the first cities drew breath, and where gods and mortals walked side by side. You are about to hear the story of Mesopotamia, the land between the two rivers. Our journey will be a calm current, flowing through the Fertile Crescent, the cradle that held and nourished human civilization. We will not rush. We will move slowly, feeling every breath of the past, every whisper of those who came before. So find a comfortable position. Close your eyes. Take a deep, slow breath and exhale completely. Feel your body begin to unwind, your mind begin to settle, and allow the calm waves of history to gently lull you into a soft and peaceful sleep. Our journey begins not with the clash of swords or the weight of crowns, but with the murmur of water and the scent of damp earth after a rain. It begins long, long ago, when history itself was still an infant, sleeping peacefully in the arms of nature. The world, then, was a wild and majestic symphony. The last great ice age had just retreated, leaving behind a land that was slowly reawakening. The immense sheets of ice that had covered so much of the globe had melted back to the north, returning warmth to the earth. The air was no longer frigid, and the ground, after slumbering for millennia beneath snow and ice, was beginning to stir. Imagine yourself standing on a gentle slope of the Zagros Mountains. The wind touches your skin, carrying the scent of wild grasses and damp earth. Below you, a valley stretches out, green and peaceful. In the distance, two silver ribbons glitter in the sun. Those are the Tigris and the Euphrates, the two great rivers that would shape the destiny of this land. They begin their journey in the high mountains of Anatolia, carrying with them fertile silt and life itself, flowing slowly down to the plains in the south. For tens of thousands of years, our ancestors had lived as nomads. They were hunters and gatherers, children of nature, moving with the herds of animals and the seasons of ripening fruit. Each day was a new journey, a constant search for survival. Their lives were tied to the rhythm of the world. Sunrise was the beginning, sunset was the time for rest. They had no permanent homes, only temporary shelters under rock ledges or in huts made of animal hide. Their world was vast and without borders, but it was also filled with uncertainty and peril. They understood the language of the wind, could read the tracks of animals, and knew which plants were safe to eat and which mushrooms held poison. They were a part of nature, dissolving into it like a drop of water in the ocean. Their memories were not recorded on tablets of clay or scrolls of paper, but were etched into the stories told around the fire, in the songs passed from one generation to the next. It was a pure existence, but also a fragile one. But then, a great change, a quiet revolution began to sprout. It did not come from a great conquest or a singular invention. It came from a subtle observation, a deeper understanding of the life cycle of plants. Perhaps it began with a woman. Let us call her Alara. Alara was not a queen or a priestess. She was simply an ordinary woman of her tribe. Every day, she and the other women would walk along the hillsides to find food. They gathered berries, dug for roots, and most especially, they searched for the wild wheat and barley that grew on the slopes. They used crude sickles of flint to cut the golden stalks, then carried them back to their camp to grind the grains into flour between two stones. One day, while carrying a full basket of wheat, Alara accidentally spilled some of the grains near the camp. She paid it little mind. It was a common occurrence. But weeks later, after the first seasonal rains, she noticed something miraculous. From the very spot where the grains had fallen, tiny green shoots had pushed through the earth. They grew taller each day, reaching for the light, and soon they produced stalks of grain, identical to the ones she always gathered on the distant hills. A simple yet revolutionary thought sparked in Alara's mind. What if we no longer had to travel so far to find our food? What if we could make the plants grow right where we live? She shared her discovery with the others. At first, there may have been looks of doubt. The nomadic life was in their blood. The idea of staying in one place was foreign, even frightening. To stay in one place meant exhausting the resources around you, meant becoming an easy target for predators. But the seed of an idea, just like a seed of wheat, once planted, will quietly begin to grow. They started to experiment. They set aside a small patch of land, broke the soil with pointed sticks, and sowed the seeds they had carefully saved. They waited. They watched. They learned to tend to the delicate sprouts, protecting them from birds and insects. It was a great gamble with nature. They were betting the survival of their entire tribe on this small patch of earth, on whether the rains would come at the right time, on whether the sun would shine brightly enough. Anxiety was mixed with hope. The first thing they did each morning was run to the patch to see if the green shoots were still there, if they had grown since the day before. And then, the day of the first harvest arrived. The yield was not large, but it was real. Golden stalks, heavy with grain, grown by their own hands. They no longer had to wander for miles to find them. They were right here, next to their home. For the first time in human history, people had actively created their own food supply. The joy of that first harvest was perhaps the purest and most profound joy. It was not just the joy of having food, but the joy of creation, of partnership with the earth. They were no longer passive gatherers. They had become farmers. The agricultural revolution began just like that, not with a loud bang, but with a whisper. The whisper of a seed sprouting in the earth, and the whisper of a new idea sprouting in the human mind. And with the first fields, a new concept was also born: home. Since they no longer had to be constantly on the move, people began to build more permanent dwellings. They no longer used temporary huts. They learned to mix clay with straw to make mud bricks, which they dried under the harsh sun of the Fertile Crescent. They built round or rectangular houses with thick walls to keep them cool in the summer and warm in the winter. Imagine one of these first villages. The houses are clustered together, close and cozy. In the center is a common courtyard where people gather after a day's work. The sound of children playing fills the air, the sound of women talking as they grind grain, the sound of men mending their tools for the next season. Smoke rises from the rooftops, carrying the scent of baking bread and simmering stew. This was not just a shelter. This was a community. People lived together, worked together, and protected one another. They shared seeds, shared knowledge, and faced new challenges together. If one family's crop failed, others would share their harvest. If a wild animal attacked, the whole village would fight it off. Social bonds grew stronger than ever before. Inside each home, life was changing too. People began to store things. They dug pits in the floors of their houses to keep grain, ensuring a food supply through the lean months or in case of a bad harvest. This storage brought a sense of security they had never known. The constant gnawing fear of starvation began to recede, replaced by stability and the ability to plan for the future. They began to craft new, more refined tools. Stone mortars and pestles for grinding grain became more effective. Flint sickles were sharpened with greater care, and most importantly, they invented pottery. The discovery that clay, when fired at high temperatures, becomes hard and waterproof was another breakthrough. Now they could create jars, pots, and bowls to safely store water, oil, and other foods. Pottery was not only practical, it was also a medium for artistic expression. People began to decorate their creations with simple, carved lines and geometric patterns. These were the first expressions of beauty, of a creativity that went beyond simple survival. Spiritual life also grew richer and more complex. As life became tied to the land and the seasons, people began to worship new deities. They revered the Earth Mother, the goddess who granted fertility and bountiful harvests. They prayed to the god of rain and the god of the sun, the powers that held the success or failure of a season in their hands. They buried their dead right under the floors of their houses. This was a profoundly meaningful act. The departed were not separated from the community. They remained a part of the family, a part of the home, their spirits staying to watch over the living. Sometimes they placed offerings in the graves, a necklace of shells, a fine stone tool, or a ceramic jar filled with grain. This shows a belief in an afterlife, a world beyond this one where the departed would still need the tools of everyday life. Life had become more stable, but also more complex. New problems arose. Disputes over land and water began to appear. Who owned this field? Who had the right to draw water from that stream? The division of labor also became more pronounced. Some were good at farming, others were good at making pottery, while others still were skilled hunters or fighters. Slowly, a rudimentary social structure began to form. But for tonight, let us set aside those complexities. Let us just listen to the peaceful rhythm of this ancient village. Feel the warmth of the fire in the hearth, the smell of the earth after a rain, and the solidness of the mud brick walls that sheltered so many generations. This was the dawn of civilization. A dawn that was not loud or hurried. It happened slowly over thousands of years, just like a seed slowly pushing its way through the soil, carrying with it the promise of a new future, a new world built by human hands. And now, let your mind rest in that peaceful scene. Let the whisper of the first seeds lull you into sleep. Our journey has only just begun. Ahead lie great cities, powerful kings, and mighty empires. But all of it was built on the foundation laid in these first days, when humankind first heard the call of the rivers and decided to stop, to plant a seed, and to call that place home. In our last chapter, we paused in the first small villages, where people learned to plant seeds and call a piece of land their home. It was a cozy, small-scale world, nestled in the green hills and valleys of the northern Fertile Crescent. Now, let your mind drift southward. Follow the course of the two great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, down to the land that would later be called Sumer. The landscape here is completely different. There are no more rolling hills or dense forests. Instead, before your eyes is a vast, flat plain that stretches to the horizon. The sky seems higher here, and the sun more intense. In the dry season, the earth cracks under the scorching heat, and the air is thick and still, with only the sound of wind rustling through dry reeds. This is a land of extremes, either baked into a lifeless clay or violently flooded. The first people who migrated here must have felt a sense of awe and dread. The soil here, the silt deposited by the rivers over thousands of years, was incredibly fertile. It was richer than any soil they had ever seen. But there was a fundamental problem. It almost never rained. Life depended entirely on the two rivers. Each year, in the spring, melting snow from the distant northern mountains would cause the rivers to swell and overflow their banks, depositing a new layer of precious silt. But this flood was unpredictable. Some years, it came too early, washing away the new sprouts. Some years, it came too late, leaving the plants to wither in the heat. Some years, the flood was too great, drowning everything, destroying homes and fields. And some years, it was too small, its waters unable to reach the fields far from the riverbank. The river was both a life-giving mother and a fierce, unpredictable god. To survive in this land, people could not simply plant seeds and pray. They had to do something more. They had to learn to tame the river. This idea did not arise overnight. It began with small efforts. A single family might dig a small ditch from the riverbank to bring water to their patch of land. A group of families might work together to build a low earthen dike to keep the floodwaters from their homes. They observed. They learned. They realized that their individual efforts were not enough. One family's ditch would fill with mud after a single season. A small group's dike would break against the force of a great flood. They understood that to truly control the water, they would have to cooperate on a scale never seen before. And so, one of the first great community projects in human history was born. Imagine a morning in Sumer, about 6,000 years ago. The sun has just risen, painting the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold. Hundreds, then thousands of men and women leave their homes of reed and mud to walk out onto the plains. They do not carry sickles to harvest grain. They carry wooden hoes, stone spades, and baskets woven from reeds. Their goal is to dig a great canal, a main channel running parallel to the river, deep and wide enough to hold an immense amount of water. From this main canal, they would dig smaller, secondary canals, branching out like veins, carrying the life-giving water to every single field, whether near the river or far from its banks. The work was incredibly hard. Under the baking sun, they dug, they shoveled, they carried. Sweat dripped from their backs, mixing with the dust of the earth. There were no machines, only human power. But there was something stronger than muscle. It was the power of a shared will. They worked together, organized. There were leaders, supervisors, diggers, and carriers. They chanted work songs together, the rhythm of the song matching the rhythm of the hose, creating a symphony of creation. They did not only dig canals, they built strong dikes to protect their villages and fields from unexpected floods. They created reservoirs to store water for the dry months. Slowly, a complex network of irrigation took shape, covering the entire plain. And then, the miracle happened. The first time the gate of a new dam was opened, the clear water from the main canal flowed into the smaller channels, and then slowly soaked into the dry, cracked fields. Listen to that sound. The sound of water trickling over parched earth. The sound of the farmers' joyous cheers. The ground, like a thirsty traveler in the desert, greedily drank every drop. In just a few days, the color green returned. The seeds they had planted now had enough water to sprout and grow strong. Thanks to this irrigation system, the Sumerians turned a harsh land into the breadbasket of the ancient world. They didn't have just one harvest a year, but 2, or even 3. Agricultural yields skyrocketed. For the first time, humanity produced a massive surplus of food. They had more barley, wheat, and dates than they needed to eat. This surplus was the key that unlocked a new chapter for civilization. When not everyone had to be a farmer, some people could dedicate their time and talents to other tasks. The specialization of labor was born. A man with skillful hands no longer needed to work in the fields. He could stay home and focus on making better, more beautiful pottery on the newly invented potter's wheel. He became a potter. A woman with a talent for weaving no longer needed to worry about the fields. She could spend her days spinning flax and weaving it into fine cloth. She became a weaver. Then came the carpenters, the metal workers. Copper was beginning to be used. The builders, the boat makers. Crafts of all kinds flourished. The villages were no longer just producing food. They were creating countless other goods. This prosperity led to an inevitable consequence, a population boom. The small villages of the past grew into bustling towns, and soon after, into the very first true cities on Earth. One of the first, and the one considered the most ancient in Sumerian tradition, was the city of Eridu. Let us visit Eridu as evening falls. The city does not have the mighty stone walls we might imagine. It is a dense cluster of mud brick houses situated along a network of canals. Small boats, made of bundled reeds sealed with black bitumen, glide silently on the water, laden with goods, sacks of barley, jars of beer, stacks of dried fish. But the center of Eridu, its heart and soul, is not a market or a king's palace. Its center is a temple. The Sumerians believed that the world was created and ruled by the gods. Each city belonged to a specific god, and human beings were created for a single purpose: to serve the gods. Serving the gods was not just about praying and making offerings. Serving the gods meant working, keeping the city orderly and prosperous. If the gods were pleased, they would grant favorable rains and bountiful harvests. If they were angry, they would send floods, plagues, and famine. The patron god of Eridu was Enki, the god of fresh water, wisdom, and magic. Enki's temple was not a massive structure at first. In the beginning, it was likely just a simple reed hut, built on a platform of earth slightly higher than the other houses, as a sign of respect. But over time, through many generations, the temple was continually rebuilt, each time larger and more magnificent than the last. They would build a new foundation directly on top of the old one, creating a multi-layered structure. This was the forerunner of the great ziggurats we will see later. The temple was not only a place of worship. It was the economic and administrative center of the city. All the surplus food was collected and stored in the temple granaries. The priests who served the god were not just religious figures. They were the managers. They organized the labor teams to dig canals and repair dikes. They distributed rations to the craftspeople, the soldiers, and all those who did not farm directly. They were the first scientists, observing the stars to create a calendar, predict the timing of the floods, and decide the season for planting. They were the keepers of knowledge. And it was here, in the temple storerooms, facing the pressure of managing an increasingly complex economy, that the greatest invention of the Sumerians was born. Imagine an elderly priest standing among mountains of stored barley. He has to remember how many baskets Farmer A brought in, how many rations Potter B has received. Human memory is limited. He needed a system. At first they used small stones or little clay shapes, called tokens, in different forms to represent different goods: a circle for a basket of grain, a triangle for a sheep. but this system was still cumbersome. Then one day, someone had a stroke of genius. Instead of using clay tokens, why not take a flat, soft piece of clay and use a sharpened reed to draw a picture of the item on it? A picture of a stalk of grain for barley, a picture of a bull's head for cattle. Next to the picture, they made straight lines or dots to indicate the quantity. Writing was born. It was a moment that changed the world. For the first time, words and ideas could be permanently recorded. History no longer had to be passed down through oral stories. It could be etched into clay. Laws, contracts, hymns to the gods, all could be preserved. Knowledge could be accumulated and passed down accurately through the generations. From these early pictures, or pictographs, the Sumerians gradually simplified them into wedge-shaped marks, made by pressing the tip of a reed into wet clay. This writing system came to be called cuneiform, and it would be used throughout the Near East for the next 3,000 years. And so, on the arid plains of southern Mesopotamia, a new world took shape. A world of cities, ruled by gods and their priests. A world built on a foundation of water and clay. Water from the irrigation canals, and clay used to build homes, make pottery, and most importantly, to hold the first written words. Rest here for a moment. Breathe deeply. Let the image of ancient Eridu, with its canals gleaming under the moonlight and the sacred fire that never went out on its temple top, settle in your mind. This is only the beginning of the story of the Sumerian city-states. Ahead lies the rise of Uruk, the greatest city of its time, and a world growing more complex, with kings, wars, and the first epic poems of humankind. In our last chapter, we left the Sumerian city-states at the peak of their development. Cities like Uruk, Ur, Lagash, and Kish had become glittering jewels on the fertile strip of land between the two rivers. Each city was its own world, a small kingdom protected by strong mud-brick walls, with its own patron god and its own king. This prosperity came with a price. Imagine a panoramic view of the land of Sumer around the year 2500 BCE. From above, it is not a unified kingdom, but a chessboard of rivals. The cities were in constant competition. They competed for water from the canals, for fertile land along their borders. This competition often erupted into war. Armies with gleaming copper helmets, carrying shields and long spears, marched across the fields. They were farmers and artisans, temporarily leaving their daily work to fight for their city and their god. The wars were constant, exhausting, and destructive. One city would be victorious today only for another to rise tomorrow. History was written in torn treaties and shifting border markers. It was a cycle of conflict, an unending symphony of division. In this context, to the north of Sumer, in the central part of Mesopotamia, another people were quietly growing in strength. They were the Akkadians. They had lived there for a long time, as neighbors to the Sumerians. They were not invaders, but co-inhabitants of this land. They spoke a different language, a Semitic tongue related to later languages like Arabic and Hebrew, completely distinct from the unique Sumerian language. The Akkadians admired and absorbed the high culture of the Sumerians. They adopted the cuneiform writing system. They worshipped the Sumerian gods, though they often called them by different names, and they learned the techniques of farming and building. They were like diligent students, but within them they held a different spirit, a different energy that was waiting for its moment to rise. And then a man appeared who would change everything. His name echoes through millennia of history like a legend. Sargon. The story of his birth is not recorded in dry royal chronicles, but is told as a myth, a whisper along the riverbank. It is said that his mother was a high priestess who had taken a vow of purity. Her pregnancy was therefore a forbidden secret. To protect her child, she could not raise him openly. When the baby was born, she placed him in a basket woven of reeds, carefully sealing the gaps with black bitumen so that no water could enter. Then, in the dark of night, she went quietly to the bank of the Euphrates River, placed the basket containing her tiny child into the water, and entrusted his fate to the gods. The river, the gentle mother of the land, did not abandon the child. The basket floated gently downstream, bobbing like a leaf, until it was caught in the reeds near where a gardener named Akki was drawing water. Akki, a kind man, found the basket. When he opened it and saw the beautiful baby inside, he saw it as a gift from the gods. He took the child home, adopted him as his own son, and gave him the name Sharukin, which we know as Sargon. The name means the true king, or the legitimate king, a name that was a prophecy. Sargon grew up in an ordinary family, knowing nothing of his mysterious origins. He learned the trade of a gardener from his adoptive father, but it seems fate had a different path for him. Through his intelligence and charm, he was accepted into the court of Ur-Zababa, the king of Kish, one of the most powerful Sumerian city-states at the time. He began in a humble position, the king's cupbearer. Being a cupbearer was not just about pouring wine. It was a position of absolute trust, as a cupbearer could easily poison the king. Sargon was always by the king's side, listening to discussions of politics, war, and court intrigue. He learned quickly, observing the ways power worked. Legend says that the goddess Inanna, known to the Akkadians as Ishtar, the goddess of love, beauty, and war, grew fond of the young Sargon. She watched over him and blessed him. One night, King Ur-Zababa had a terrifying dream, a dream of blood and ruin. When he awoke, he believed that Sargon was the threat in his dream. But instead of killing Sargon immediately, perhaps fearing the wrath of the gods, Ur-Zababa chose another way. He sent Sargon to deliver a message, carved on a clay tablet, to Lugal-Zaggisi, the powerful king of the city of Umma, who by then had conquered and united most of the Sumerian city-states under his rule. The message on the tablet was a short, simple command: kill the one who brings this letter. It was a disguised death sentence, but Sargon, perhaps warned by the goddess Inanna or through his own cunning, did not walk straight to his death. What happened next is veiled in the mists of history, but the result is clear. Sargon not only survived, he returned and overthrew Ur-Zababa himself. He did not take the throne of Kish. Instead, he did something unprecedented. He led his loyal followers north and, on a piece of open land, he built an entirely new city. That city was named Akkad. Its exact location remains a mystery to this day, a legendary city buried by the sands of time. Akkad was not a traditional Sumerian city-state. It was the capital of a new idea, Sargon's own center of power. From Akkad, Sargon began his great conquest. He was no longer a gardener or a cupbearer. He had become a military genius. He built a professional standing army that was loyal to him personally, not to a city or a god. His first target was Lugal-Zaggisi, the lord of Sumer, the very man who had received the order to kill him. Sargon defeated Lugal-Zaggisi's powerful army in a decisive battle. He captured Lugal-Zaggisi, put him in a neckstock, and paraded him to the temple of the chief god Enlil in the city of Nippur as a thanksgiving offering. It was a deeply symbolic act, declaring that Sargon had now replaced Lugalzagisi as the one chosen by the gods. But Sargon did not stop there. He did not want to be just another overlord like Lugalzagesi. He wanted absolute unity. He marched his army from one Sumerian city-state to the next. Uruk, Ur, Lagash, the once proud and independent cities fell, one by one, before the Akkadian army. He had their city walls torn down, an act that was not only military but also symbolic, stripping them of their pride and their ability to defend themselves. After conquering all of Mesopotamia, Sargon led his army to the shore of the Lower Sea, the Persian Gulf. There, he performed a symbolic ritual. He washed his weapons in the seawater. This act declared to the entire world that his conquest was complete, that his power stretched from the Upper Sea, the Mediterranean, to the Lower Sea. For the first time in history, the entire Fertile Crescent was united under the rule of a single man. Sargon had created the world's first empire. He gave himself a new title, one that expressed his boundless ambition: King of Sumer and Akkad, and later, King of the 4 quarters of the world. The world had changed. The cycle of endless wars between the city-states had temporarily ended. A peace had been established, but it was the peace of the conqueror, maintained by military might and the iron will of one man. The man of unknown origins, the child set adrift in the river, the gardener, the cupbearer, had now become the most powerful person in the known world. His story is a reminder that sometimes history is not made by ancient royal lineages, but by extraordinary individuals who dare to dream a bigger dream and have the talent, the ruthlessness, and the luck to make that dream a reality. And now, let stillness settle over you. Picture the land of Mesopotamia, sleeping under the rule of its new king. The torches on the watchtowers of the legendary city of Akkad burn brightly in the night, illuminating a new world order. In the next part of our journey, we will explore how Sargon and his descendants ruled this vast empire and what legacy they left for humankind. In our last chapter, we witnessed the extraordinary rise of Sargon and the Akkadian Empire. A world of divided city-states had been unified by the will and power of one man. It seemed a new, stable order had been established. The kings who succeeded Sargon, like his grandson Naram-Sin, pushed that power even further, having himself declared a living god, demanding that priests worship him. The Akkadian Empire seemed invincible, a mountain of bronze and granite looming over Mesopotamia. But anything built by mortals, no matter how great, cannot last forever. Even mountains are worn down by time. The fall of Akkad was not a sudden event. It was like a slow illness, beginning deep within. The Sumerian cities of the south, with their millennia of independence and deep pride, never truly accepted the rule of the northern Akkadian-speaking people. They bowed before military might, but in their hearts, the fire of rebellion always simmered. Uprisings constantly broke out, were extinguished in blood, only to flare up somewhere else. The vast empire began to crack from within. And then, it seemed the gods themselves turned their backs on Akkad. A disaster more silent and terrible than any army descended upon the land. A long and severe drought swept across the Near East. Modern scientists call it the 4.2 kiloyear event, but for the people of Mesopotamia, it was a sign of divine wrath. Imagine the landscape then, a cloudless sky day after day. The sun became a scorching, merciless orb. The Tigris and Euphrates, The two life-giving arteries of the land began to run low. The water in the great irrigation canals, the pride of their civilization, dwindled to a weak trickle, then dried up completely, leaving the canal beds cracked like scars on the face of the earth. The green fields of barley now turned yellow and withered. Food became scarce. Famine began to stalk the land. People believed that the arrogance of the Akkadian kings, especially Naram-Sin declaring himself a god, had offended the true gods, and now they were all paying the price. As the empire weakened from rebellion and starvation, a final fatal blow came from the outside. From the wild Zagros mountains to the east, a people described by the Sumerians with horror swept down. They were the Gutians. To the civilized Mesopotamians, the Gutians were the embodiment of chaos. Ancient texts describe them as a people who knew no kingship, who knew no restraint. They had no writing, no cities, no temples. They were like a storm from the mountains, a swarm of wild beasts, uncontrollable and incomprehensible. They poured into the plains, looting and destroying. The Akkadian army, once the conqueror of the world, was now in disarray, unable to stop this wave. The legendary city of Akkad, the imperial capital, was captured and destroyed. It vanished from history so mysteriously that to this day, archaeologists have not found its remains. The world's first empire had collapsed. A dark age descended upon Mesopotamia. The period of Gutian rule was a sad chapter in history. They did not know how to manage a complex society. The canal network was neglected and fell into disrepair. Trade came to a standstill. Law and order disintegrated. Each city huddled behind its walls, fending for itself. The Sumerian laments from this period are filled with sorrow. The city has become a ruin. The gods have abandoned us. The canals are full of silt. The fields are untended. It was a time of silence, when scribes had little to record, but grief. But even in the darkest night, the flame of Sumerian civilization had not been completely extinguished. It was merely smoldering, waiting for a kind wind to flare up once more. After nearly a century of living under the chaotic yoke of the Gutians, a hero emerged. His name was Utu-Hengal, king of Uruk, the city of the mythical hero Gilgamesh. He rallied the Sumerian cities, awakened their national pride, and led a rebellion. In a decisive battle, he defeated and captured the last Gutian king, ending the Dark Age. Mesopotamia was free once more. Utu-Hengal cleared the way, but the man who would lay the foundation for a new golden age was someone else. His name was Ur-Nammu. Ur-Nammu was at first a brilliant general, appointed by Utu-Hengal as the governor of the city of Ur. Ur was not just an ancient city. It was the center of worship for the moon god Nana, one of the most important deities in the Sumerian pantheon. After Utu-Hengal's death, Ur-Nammu rose to take power. But he was not like Sargon, a warlike conqueror. He was a builder, a healer. Ur-Nammu's ambition was not to conquer the world, but to rebuild the world of the Sumerians, to return it to its former order and glory. His dynasty, known as the Third Dynasty of Ur, or Ur-Thur, would be the final, brilliant symphony of the Sumerian civilization. His first task was to heal the wounds of the land. He had the canal systems repaired, clearing the blocked channels and bringing water back to the thirsty fields. He rebuilt the temples not only in Ur, but also in other cities like Uruk, Eridu, and Nippur, showing that he was the king of all the Sumerian people, not just of Ur. Trade was revived. Merchant boats once again sailed the rivers, and caravans once again crossed the deserts, bringing wealth and prosperity back to the land. But his greatest project, the symbol of the Sumerian Renaissance, was the Great Ziggurat of Ur. Imagine yourself on that immense construction site. Thousands of workers, under the direction of architects and priests, are working with passion. They are not building a fortress for defense, but a ladder to connect earth and heaven. The foundation of the structure is a massive rectangle. Its core is made of millions of sun-dried mud bricks, and its outer shell is built of incredibly durable baked bricks, bound together with bitumen. Ur-Nammu was building an artificial mountain, with 3 massive terraces, each one smaller than the one below it. Great ramps and staircases led to the summit, where there was a small shrine believed to be the earthly dwelling of the moon god Nana when he visited his city. This structure was not just an architectural marvel, it was a statement of faith and order. It declared that the chaos was over, and the gods had returned to reign over the land of Sumer. Yet perhaps Ur-Nammu's greatest legacy, even more so than his architectural works, was something invisible: the law. He issued a code of laws, known today as the Code of Ur-Nammu, the oldest surviving law code in human history. This code was not a list of brutal punishments. It began with an inspiring prologue, declaring that the king's purpose was to establish justice in the land, to banish wickedness and evil, so that the orphan should not fall prey to the wealthy, nor the widow to the powerful. The Code of Ur-Nammu shows a remarkable humanistic spirit. For crimes like personal injury, it did not apply the principle of an eye for an eye, like the later Code of Hammurabi, but instead prescribed monetary fines. It sought compensation and reconciliation rather than vengeance. It reveals a society that craved fairness, stability, and peace after a long period shrouded in darkness. Ur-Nammu, the builder king, the lawgiver king, began the final symphony of the Sumerians with notes of solemn, majestic beauty. He rebuilt a nation from its ashes, bringing back order, justice, and hope. Rest now in the scene of a kingdom being reborn. Listen to the sound of the workers' hammers as they build the ziggurat, and feel the peace that comes from a society ruled by law instead of violence. The symphony is still playing, and in the next part of our story, we will see it reach its magnificent peak under his son, Shulgi, before its final notes fade into the silence of history. We left our story in the last chapter as the kingdom of Ur III, the brilliant renaissance of the Sumerians, was at the height of its power and order. The great ziggurat of Ur stood tall against the sky, and the law code of Ur-Nammu had brought justice to the land. It seemed the Sumerian symphony would play on forever. But in history, as in music, every symphony must have its final note. And for the Sumerians, that note was a tragic one. The prosperity of Ur III attracted envious eyes from the outside. To the west, from the desert regions of Syria, nomadic tribes speaking a Semitic language known as the Amorites began to migrate into Mesopotamia in large numbers. They did not come as a conquering army, but like a slow, rising tide seeping into every corner of society. They came in search of land, in search of a better life. The pressure they put on the western border grew immense. Meanwhile, to the east, across the Zagros Mountains, Mesopotamia's old enemy, the Elamites, were also on the rise. Caught between these two forces, the empire of Ur-Thur began to falter. Vassal cities rebelled. the economy collapsed. And then, the tragedy occurred. Around the year 2004 BCE, the Elamite army swept in, besieged, and captured the capital city of Ur. The great city, the heart of Sumerian civilization, was sacked and burned. Its last king, Ibbi-Sin, was captured and taken away to Elam. The laments written after this event are filled with an almost unbearable sorrow. One of them, the Lament for Ur, describes the horrific scene. O my city, Ur, in your shrines the wind howls. In my city the sound of weeping rings. Nana, the patron god, has abandoned his temple. This was the end of the political power of the Sumerians. The people who had given the world writing, cities, and law had now permanently lost their role as masters on the stage of history. There would never again be a Sumerian king. Their language would gradually fade from daily life, becoming a classical tongue used only by priests and scholars, much like Latin in later Europe. The symphony had truly ended. After the fall of Ur, Mesopotamia once again fell into a state of division. A new period of chaos began, known as the Isin-Larsa period, named after the two most powerful cities of the time, which constantly vied for supremacy. An interesting thing happened. The kings of these cities, whether in Isin, Larsa, or elsewhere, were mostly Amorites, the nomads of yesterday. But they did not destroy the Sumerian culture. On the contrary, they adopted it with reverence. They took on Sumerian-style royal names, declared themselves the successors to the kings of Ur, and continued the religious rites and cultural traditions. They were like the new owners of an ancient house, trying to preserve every heirloom of the previous inhabitants. And on this complex political chessboard, there was a small city on the banks of the Euphrates that seemed unremarkable. Its name was Babylon, which we call Babylon. It too was ruled by an Amorite dynasty. For many years, Babylon was just a minor piece in the game, overshadowed by the great powers around it. Until, in the year 1792 BCE, a young king ascended the throne. He was the sixth king of his dynasty, and his name was Hammurabi. When Hammurabi took power, his kingdom was small and weak. He was surrounded by much stronger rivals, Rim-Sin of Larsa to the south, an old and powerful king, the kingdom of Eshnunna to the northeast, and the kingdom of Mari to the northwest, a wealthy center of trade. Any misstep could have wiped Babylon off the map. But Hammurabi was not an impulsive conqueror like Sargon. He was a master politician, a patient and wise player of the game. For the first 3 decades of his reign, he hardly went to war. Instead, he focused on strengthening his kingdom from within. He built temples, fortified defenses, and most importantly, he managed the economy brilliantly, ensuring the prosperity of his people. He was like a diligent gardener, tending to his own tree to make it strong before thinking of the forest beyond. Meanwhile, he constantly sent and received diplomatic messages, inscribed on thousands of clay tablets that archaeologists have found. He formed alliances, and then he broke them. He provoked his rivals to fight each other, then stood back and watched, waiting for his moment. He was a cunning fox among a pack of wolves. And then, when his rivals were tired and weakened from their wars with each other, Hammurabi began to move. With lightning speed, he attacked and defeated the surrounding kingdoms one by one. Finally, only his greatest rival remained, Rim-Sin of Larsa. Hammurabi besieged and conquered Larsa, uniting all of southern Mesopotamia. He then marched north, conquering Mari as well. After more than 30 years of patience, in just a few short years, Hammurabi had reunited all of Mesopotamia under the power of Babylon. A new empire was born. But Hammurabi understood that an empire built by force could not last without a stronger foundation. He wanted to be remembered not just as a great warrior, but as a just king, a father of his people, a shepherd of his people. And to do this, he undertook an extraordinary project: to collect, systematize, and issue a single code of laws for his entire empire. The Code of Hammurabi. Imagine an immortal structure, not of mud brick, but of stone and words. It is a stele, a pillar of black diorite, polished to a sheen, standing over 7 feet tall. It was made not just to command, but to last through time. At the very top of the pillar is a finely carved relief. On the right, the sun god Shamash, who is also the god of justice, sits upon his throne. Rays of light shine from his shoulders. His hand is outstretched, giving 2 objects to the king standing before him: a ring and a staff, the symbols of divine authority to issue laws and maintain order. The king, standing in a pose of humble respect, his hand raised to his mouth, is Hammurabi himself. The message of this image is clear. These laws were not invented by Hammurabi. They came from the gods. The king was merely the chosen vessel to transmit and enforce the divine will. Below this carving, covering the entire surface of the pillar, are nearly 300 laws, etched in elegant cuneiform, covering almost every aspect of life: commercial contracts, land ownership, marriage and family, criminal offenses. In the prologue, Hammurabi states his purpose: to make justice shine in the land, to destroy the evil and the wicked, that the strong might not oppress the weak. And in the epilogue, he promises that any citizen who has been wronged can come before this pillar, read my stele, and may this stele enlighten him as to his case. Let him understand his rights, and may his heart be at peace. This pillar was not just a legal text. It was a permanent monument to the ideal of a just and orderly society, ruled by a wise king and protected by the gods. It was the founding declaration of the Babylonian Empire. For the 3rd time, the land between the 2 rivers was united. The first time by Sargon, the conqueror, the second by Ur-Nammu, the healer, and this time by Hammurabi, the lawgiver king. He created a model of rule that would influence the entire ancient world for centuries to come. Let your mind rest now in the solidness of this black stone pillar. Feel the order and clarity that these laws brought to a world that had just emerged from chaos. In the next part of this chapter, we will delve deeper into the laws themselves and explore how the Babylonians reshaped their entire world of the gods to legitimize the power of their city. In our last chapter, we admired the order and stability of the old Babylonian Empire under Hammurabi and his successors. The stone pillars of law stood tall, and the city of Babylon was the undisputed center of the civilized world. It seemed this order would last forever. But history is always in motion. Like the current of the Euphrates, it never stands still. While Babylon was enjoying its status, new forces, new peoples were rising in distant lands. To the north, in the rugged and windy highlands of Anatolia, in what is now modern-day Turkey, a hardy people had built a powerful kingdom. They were the Hittites. They spoke an Indo-European language, completely different from the Semitic tongues or from Sumerian. They were masters of metalworking and of war, and they possessed a weapon that changed the balance of power in the ancient world: the war chariot. This was not the heavy, 4-wheeled cart of the old Sumerians. The Hittite war chariot was a technological marvel. It was light, with two spoked wheels, pulled by well-trained horses. It could move with incredible speed across the battlefield, becoming a mobile archery platform, able to pierce and disrupt any infantry formation. It was the battle tank of the Bronze Age. Meanwhile, Hammurabi's empire, after his death, began to weaken under his less capable successors. And then a shocking event occurred, a thunderbolt that struck the very heart of Mesopotamia. Around the year 1595 BCE, the young and daring Hittite king, Mursili I, did the unthinkable. He led his chariot army on a bold, long-distance campaign, following the Euphrates River for hundreds of miles, bypassing all defenses, and suddenly appeared before the gates of Babylon. The great city, once thought to be impregnable, fell. The Hittites swept in, sacked the capital, and in a deeply symbolic act, they seized the statue of Marduk, the supreme god of Babylon, and carried it back north as a war trophy. After spreading chaos, the Hittites did something strange. They retreated. They had no intention of staying to rule this distant land. Their attack was like a hurricane. It arrived quickly, was terribly destructive, and then it was gone, leaving behind a vast power vacuum. The Babylonian Empire of Hammurabi had collapsed. Into that vacuum, another people slowly moved. They came from the Zagros Mountains, like the Gutians of the past. They were the Kassites. But unlike the Gutians, the Kassites were not destroyers. They were administrators. They took over the land of Babylonia slowly, cleverly, and established a dynasty that would last for over 400 years, the longest dynasty in Mesopotamian history. The Kassites had a deep respect for the culture they inherited. They did not impose their own gods or language. Instead, they became the greatest protectors of the Sumerian and Babylonian heritage. They worshipped Marduk, used cuneiform script, and Kassite scribes diligently copied, preserved, and systematized countless ancient works of literature, science, and religion. Under Kassite rule, Babylonia may no longer have been a military superpower, but it gained centuries of stability and peace. It became a cultural and religious center revered by the entire ancient world, a holy land, a living museum of civilization. And now, for the first time in our journey, the map of history is no longer centered only on Mesopotamia. It has expanded. An international stage has formed, featuring several great powers. Let us look at the chessboard of the great kings around the 14th century BCE. To the southwest, on the banks of the Nile, Egypt of the New Kingdom had abandoned its policy of isolation. Warrior pharaohs like Thutmose III had led armies to conquer the Near East, establishing an empire that stretched all the way to Syria. To the north, the Hittite Empire, with its strong capital at Hattusa, controlled Anatolia and was also eyeing Syria. To the east, Babylonia, under the Kassites, known as Karduniash, was a wealthy and stable kingdom. And squeezed between these three giants, in northern Mesopotamia and Syria, was a powerful but mysterious kingdom, Mitanni. The Mitanni were masters of horses and chariots, and they were the main rival to both the Hittites and the Egyptians in the fight for control of vital trade routes. This was the age of superpowers, the era of the Great Kings Club. And luckily for us, we have a unique window into their world, the Amarna letters. In the late 19th century, a royal archive was discovered in Egypt, containing over 300 clay tablets. The astonishing thing was that they were not written in Egyptian hieroglyphs, but in the Akkadian cuneiform of Mesopotamia. This was the archive of diplomatic correspondence between the Egyptian pharaohs, like Akhenaten, and the kings of the Hittites, Mitanni, Babylon, Assyria, and their vassals in Canaan. The Akkadian language had become the common tongue of international diplomacy, much like English today. Let us listen to the tone of these letters, which were sent by caravans across thousands of miles of desert. We can hear the voices of the kings themselves. They called each other brother. A letter from the Kassite king of Babylon to the Egyptian pharaoh begins, "To Akhenaten, the great king of Egypt, my brother. May it be well with you, my brother, with your house, your wives, your chariots, your horses, and with your entire kingdom." International relations were maintained by a complex system of gift exchange. The king of Mitanni writes to the pharaoh, "My brother, please send me much gold. Please send an amount of gold that cannot be counted. For in my brother's land, gold is as plentiful as dust." In return, they sent other gifts: finely crafted chariots, precious purebred horses, and deep blue lapis lazuli from the distant mountains of Afghanistan. They also cemented alliances with diplomatic marriages. Kings regularly sent their daughters or sisters to the court of an allied king. A Kassite princess would travel to Egypt. A Hittite princess might be married to a Babylonian king. These women were important pieces on the political chessboard, bringing with them enormous dowries and large retinues. Their world was one of ceremony, of diplomacy, of carefully sealed treaties. But behind the brotherly words, there was always calculation, competition, and suspicion. They were a club of equals, but everyone wanted the upper hand. In this new world, Babylonia was no longer the main player on the military chessboard, but it held a special role. It was the cultural heart. Babylonian scribes were sought after by other courts to teach writing and literature. Babylonian diviners and astronomers were respected for their wisdom. Every king wanted the recognition of the holy land of Marduk. Let your mind rest now in the image of a world connected by caravans. Camels laden with gold, ivory, precious woods, and most importantly, small clay tablets carrying the words of kings. A world held in a delicate balance, a complex harmony of diplomacy, trade, and marriage. But this balance would not last forever. In our next part, we will witness the earth-shattering clashes between these superpowers and the rise of a new power from Mesopotamia itself, a name that would sow terror across the ancient world: Assyria. In our last chapter, we left a world of delicate balance, a great king's club. The Hittite, Egyptian, Babylonian, and Mitanni empires ruled the ancient world together, exchanging letters, gifts, and even princesses. It was a complex and glittering order. But then, around the year 1200 BCE, a mysterious catastrophe swept through this world. The brilliant civilization of the Late Bronze Age collapsed. The mighty Hittite Empire disintegrated and vanished from history. The kingdom of Mitanni did the same. Great cities in Greece and Canaan were burned to the ground. Egypt was violently attacked and weakened, forced to shrink back behind its borders. Trade collapsed. Writing was nearly forgotten in many places. A new dark age descended. The cause of this collapse remains a mystery. Perhaps a combination of climate change, famine, mass migrations of the mysterious sea peoples, and internal social revolts. But the result was clear. The chessboard of the kings had been overturned. In that chaos and power vacuum, a few kingdoms survived, wounded but not destroyed. And in northern Mesopotamia, on the upper reaches of the Tigris River, one people not only survived, but began to forge themselves in the fires of this new age. They were the Assyrians. The Assyrians were not a new people. They had lived there for thousands of years, in the ancient city of Ashur and its surrounding lands. Unlike Babylonia to the south, which was protected by swamps and deserts, the Assyrian homeland was an open, vulnerable plain. Their history was a long story of being invaded and dominated by stronger powers. They had been vassals of Akkad, of of Babylon. That history had etched into their psyche a constant insecurity, a feeling that the world was a dangerous place, and that if you did not strike others, others would strike you. The best defense is a good offense became their national philosophy, and that philosophy was reinforced by their faith. Their national god, also named Ashur, was not like Marduk of Babylon, a god of order and law. Ashur was a god of war. The Assyrians believed the world was divided into two parts, the land of Ashur, Assyria itself, and the rest of the world, a place of chaos and hostility. The Assyrian king was not just a ruler, he was the high priest of Ashur, and his sacred duty was to expand the land of Ashur at any cost. Every war was not just for conquest or plunder. It was a holy war, an act of worship. From this forge of insecurity and faith, the most terrifying war machine the ancient world had ever seen was born. The Assyrian army was not a seasonal militia. It was a professional, standing army, organized with ruthless efficiency. They had heavy infantry, archers, and most importantly, cavalry, the first true horse-riding units, far more nimble and mobile than chariots. But their most fearsome weapon was their technology and psychology in the art of siege warfare. Before the Assyrians, laying siege to a well-fortified city was an extremely difficult task, but the Assyrians turned it into a science. Imagine a city under siege by the Assyrian army. First, they would set up camp, building a wall around the city to cut off all supplies. Then the work would begin. The army engineers would build enormous earthen ramps, rising higher and higher until they were level with the top of the enemy's walls. On these ramps, they would push wooden siege towers as tall as mobile buildings, from which archers could stand and fire down upon the defenders inside. At the same time, battering rams, great beasts of wood and metal covered in leather to protect them from fire, would be pushed to the base of the walls. Huge logs tipped with metal heads would strike the gates and walls with a steady, terrifying rhythm. That sound, echoing day and night, was a form of psychological torture. Meanwhile, underground, other soldiers, called sappers, would secretly dig tunnels to collapse the foundations of the walls. And finally, there was the ultimate weapon, calculated cruelty. The Assyrians deliberately spread terror. They systematically recorded and publicized the horrific punishments they inflicted on cities that dared to resist. Stories of massacres, of skinning rebel leaders, of piling heads into pyramids outside the city gates, were spread everywhere. The purpose of this was not pure sadism. It was a terrifyingly effective psychological strategy. These stories, these ghosts on the spear's tip, often arrived before the army itself. They attacked the minds of the enemy, paralyzing their will to resist. Many cities chose to surrender immediately upon seeing the Assyrian army on the horizon, just to avoid a gruesome fate. Fear was their most effective weapon. In the 9th century BCE, this war machine began to move under the leadership of a series of ruthless and talented kings. One of the first and most typical was Ashurnasirpal II. He consolidated the empire and moved the capital to a magnificent new city, Kalhu. His palace at Kalhu was a declaration of power. The walls were decorated with enormous, finely carved stone reliefs. Walking through the corridors, a visitor would see images of the king's absolute power. The king hunting lions, a symbol of his mastery over chaos. The king receiving tribute from countless conquered peoples who bowed in fear. And above all, images of the Assyrian army, with its perfectly ordered ranks trampling its enemies. But he was also a brilliant administrator. To inaugurate his new palace, he held a 10-day feast inviting nearly 70,000 guests. The texts record in detail the immense quantities of food that were consumed, showing the organizational capacity and the wealth that the empire brought. His successor, Shalmaneser III, continued the conquests. His most famous artifact is the Black Obelisk. This is a tall, black stone pillar on which are carved images of his victories. One of the most famous scenes depicts Jehu, king of Israel, prostrating himself at Shalmaneser's feet, his forehead to the ground, while his servants offer up precious tribute. The message was clear. The world was no longer a chessboard of equals. Now there was only one main player, and all others had to kneel. The order of Assyria was an order imposed by iron and fear. The peace they brought was the peace of absolute submission. Let your minds settle now. Picture the vast plains of the north, where an empire forged in insecurity rose to dominate the world. Feel their cold, systematic, and unstoppable power. In the next part, we will witness the Assyrian Empire reach its absolute peak, swallowing both Babylon and Egypt. Before it, too, is consumed in a terrible fire of vengeance. In our last chapter, we stood at the cold peak of the Assyrian Empire's power, a perfect war machine, an order imposed by iron and fear. It seemed nothing could shake the throne in Nineveh. But any oppression will breed resistance. The cruelty of Assyria had sown not only fear, but also hatred. Throughout the empire, the embers of resentment smoldered, waiting for the day they would burst into flame. And finally, that day came. In the south, in the ancient land of Babylonia, a Chaldean leader, a Semitic group that had settled there, named Nabopolassar, rose in revolt. He was not alone. To the east, on the Iranian plateau, a new power had risen, the Medes. Two of Assyria's old enemies found each other and formed a powerful alliance. And then the unthinkable happened. In the year 612 BCE, the combined army of the Medes and the Babylonians did what the whole world thought was impossible. They besieged and captured Nineveh itself, the impregnable capital of Assyria. The fall of Nineveh was not just a military victory, it was a global liberation event. Imagine the joy and relief that spread across the Near East. Peoples who had lived in terror were now free. The prophets of the Bible rejoiced at the fall of the city of blood. It is said that Nineveh was so completely destroyed, so thoroughly burned and leveled, that just a few generations later, no one knew exactly where it had once stood. The empire of terror had been brutally erased from history. From the ashes of Assyria, a new world order was formed. The Medes controlled the highlands to the north and east, and in the south, the Fertile Crescent fell to the second victor, Nabopolassar and his kingdom. And that kingdom, once again, made Babylon its capital. The ancient city on the Euphrates, the city of Hammurabi, the city that had been trampled and looted by the Assyrians, was now reborn like a phoenix. It had not just regained its independence, It had become the heir to the very enemy that had oppressed it. The Neo-Babylonian, or Chaldean, Empire was born. Nabopolassar was a brilliant military and political leader, but he was old. The burden of building a new empire, an empire that would rule not just by force, but by splendor and culture, was placed on the shoulders of his son, a name that would echo forever in history and legend: Nebuchadnezzar II. Nebuchadnezzar II was not just a warrior, he was a great builder, a visionary who wanted to make Babylon the most magnificent city the world had ever known. He wanted to build a capital that would not only terrify his vassals, but would leave them breathless with admiration. He wanted to create a paradise on earth, a center of the universe, a symbol of the rebirth and power of his people. And he succeeded. During his 43-year reign, he launched a massive building program that turned Babylon into an architectural wonder. Let us walk together through the city of Nebuchadnezzar. First, you would encounter the immense city walls. Not one, but 2 layers of towering walls, so thick it was said that 2 4-horse chariots could pass each other on the top. The walls were punctuated by countless watchtowers, creating a nearly impenetrable defense system. Babylon was not just a city, it was a fortress. Passing through the fortified gates, you would step into a world of splendor. The main road leading to the city's center was called the Processional Way. It was paved with slabs of limestone and red sandstone, polished to a shine. Along both sides of the road were high walls, decorated with brilliant blue glazed bricks. On this blue background were the images of about 120 lions, depicted in mid-roar, striding with majesty. The lion was the symbol of the goddess Ishtar, the goddess of love and war, the patron goddess of the city. Walking on this road, between the 2 rows of lions, you would feel the power and sacredness of the empire. The processional way would lead you to what is perhaps the most famous and beautiful structure of Babylon, the Ishtar Gate. This was not just a gate, it was a monumental work of art. The entire massive gate was covered in glazed bricks of a deep, brilliant blue, a color believed to be achievable only through a secret Babylonian formula. On this blue background were alternating images of 2 mythological creatures: the dragon, Mushasu, symbol of the god Marduk, and the wild bull, symbol of the weather god Adad. Imagine standing before the Ishtar Gate on a sunny morning. The sunlight striking the blue glaze would create a brilliant, almost surreal glow. It was like a gateway to paradise. Today, the Ishtar Gate has been reconstructed inside the Pergamon Museum in Berlin, and even in an enclosed space, its beauty and majesty still leave visitors breathless. Passing through the Ishtar Gate, you would enter the central district of the city, home to the great temples and the royal palace. And towering above it all was the great ziggurat of Babylon, named Etemenanki, meaning the house of the foundation of heaven and earth. This was a massive, 7-story tower, reaching a height of 91 meters, believed to be the inspiration for the story of the Tower of Babel in the Bible. From its summit, the priests observed the stars, and it was believed that the god Marduk would descend from there to rule the world. Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar was a city of confidence, of reclaimed pride. It was a loud and clear declaration to the world that after centuries of being overshadowed and oppressed, now was the age of Babylon. Let your mind rest now in the splendor of this city. Picture the deep blue of the Ishtar Gate and feel the solidness of the great city walls. In our next part, we will explore one of the most legendary wonders of Babylon, the Hanging Gardens, and listen to the sad story of the exiles who wept for their lost homeland in the midst of all this magnificence. We left our story in the radiant glory of the city of Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar II, a city of wonders, an empire built on a foundation of power and magnificence. It seemed that glory would never fade. But an empire, like a person, has its peak and its decline. The strength of the Neo-Babylonian Empire was tied to the personal talent and prestige of Nebuchadnezzar. When he died, the empire he had worked so hard to build began to lose its direction. His successors ruled for only short periods, and the court was plagued by intrigue and power struggles. The great house that Nebuchadnezzar built began to tremble from within. And then, in the year 556 BCE, a strange and unusual figure ascended the throne. He was the last king of Babylon. His name was Nabonidus. Nabonidus was not from the royal line of Nebuchadnezzar. He was a nobleman who came to the throne after a court coup. But what made him different was not his origin, but his passion. Nabonidus was not truly a politician or a military man. He was an archaeologist, a man in love with the past. While threats were growing on the borders, Nabonidus spent his time and energy traveling the kingdom, excavating the foundations of ancient temples. He eagerly read the cuneiform inscriptions carved thousands of years before, trying to find the original foundation, stones of great kings of old, like Sargon of Akkad or Ur-Nammu of Ur. He was like a scholar on the throne, his mind always turned to the golden past while neglecting the dangerous present. And he made a fatal mistake, a mistake that would cost him his kingdom. He tried to change the religion of the empire. Nabonidus's mother was a priestess of the moon god Sin in the city of Haran, and he was especially devoted to this god. He tried to elevate Sin to the supreme position, placing him above even Marduk, the patron god of Babylon, the very soul of the empire. This act deeply offended the powerful and conservative priesthood of Marduk in Babylon. They were a huge political and economic force. Now, they saw their king as a heretic, a man who had betrayed the city's greatest god. The rift between the king and the clergy divided the heart of the empire. Even stranger, Nabonidus left Babylon and lived in a self-imposed exile for 10 years at the remote Tema oasis in the Arabian desert. The reason for this act remains a mystery. During that time, he left his son, Belshazzar, to rule in Babylon. The most magnificent capital in the world felt as if it had been abandoned by its own king. While the king of Babylon was busy with the ruins of the past and living in seclusion in the desert, a new dawn, a new power, was rising in the east with terrifying speed. On the Iranian plateau, a people related to the Medes, who had been Babylon's allies in destroying Assyria, were beginning to stir. They were the Persians. Their kingdom was originally just a vassal of the mighty Median Empire. But then, an extraordinary leader emerged, a man who would change the course of world history. His name was Cyrus. Later, the world would call him Cyrus the Great. Cyrus led the Persians in revolt, defeated the Medes themselves, and united the two brother peoples into a single force. From there, he began a whirlwind of conquest. He turned west, defeated the wealthy kingdom of Lydia, and captured its legendary king, Croesus. He conquered the Greek cities on the coast of Anatolia. In just a few years, Cyrus had built a vast empire, stretching from India to the Mediterranean. And now, he turned his eyes south, toward the Fertile Crescent, toward Babylon. But Cyrus was different from the conquerors who came before him. He did not only have military might, he had a new weapon, a revolutionary philosophy of rule, tolerance. Instead of destroying cities and massacring populations, Cyrus presented himself as a liberator. He respected the customs and beliefs of the peoples he conquered. He understood that an empire built on consent would be more stable than an empire built on fear. This policy is most clearly expressed in a unique archaeological artifact, the Cyrus cylinder. After conquering Babylon, he had a cylinder made of clay on which was inscribed a declaration in Akkadian cuneiform. In that declaration, Cyrus did something incredibly clever. He claimed that he came to Babylon not as an invader, but as one chosen by the god Marduk himself. He accused Nabonidus of being an impious king who had neglected the worship of Marduk and oppressed the people. He said that Marduk himself, in his anger, had searched all the lands for a righteous ruler, and had taken Cyrus by the hand, calling his name to become the ruler of the entire world. The declaration goes on to describe how Cyrus entered Babylon in peace, welcomed warmly by the population. He promised to bring stability, to abolish forced labor, and to allow all peoples who had been exiled by the Babylonians to return to their homelands and rebuild their temples. This was the policy that allowed the Jewish people to return to Jerusalem. The stage for the final act was set. On one side was Babylon, a wealthy and magnificent empire, but divided from within. Its king was unpopular with the people and the priests. Its people were anxious and tired. On the other side was Cyrus, at the head of a massive, battle-hardened army, buoyed by a string of victories. And more importantly, he brought not the sword and fire, but the promise of liberation and peace. The history of 3,000 years of native Mesopotamian civilization, beginning in the small villages of Sumer, was now reaching its final lines. And it would end not with a world-shaking battle, but with an almost silent transfer of power as an old world gave way to a new one. Let your mind rest in the quiet before the storm. Imagine the city of Babylon preparing for a great festival, its walls still standing tall, but its foundations rotted from within. History is holding its breath, waiting for a new chapter to begin. In our last chapter, we stood before the gates of Babylon, holding our breath for a world-shattering confrontation. But that battle never came. On a festival night in the year 539 BCE, as the people of Babylon celebrated, feeling safe behind their impenetrable walls, the army of Cyrus the Great entered the city with almost no resistance. Ancient chronicles tell us that the city gates were opened from the inside. The priests of Marduk, who had grown to despise the heretical king Nabonidus, welcomed Cyrus as a liberator. Cyrus kept his word. There was no slaughter, no looting. Babylon, the golden city, was spared. Cyrus went directly to the temple of Marduk, respectfully performed the proper rituals, and was hailed by the people. But this seemingly peaceful event marked one of the most significant and final turning points in history. For the first time in over 3,000 years, the land of Mesopotamia was ruled by a power that came from entirely outside the region. From the moment Cyrus walked into Babylon, Mesopotamia permanently lost its status as the center of the world. It became a province, albeit a wealthy and important one, in a much larger empire with its capital in Persia. The book of native Mesopotamian civilization had been closed. Under the rule of the Persians, the land continued to prosper in peace, but the heart of power now beat elsewhere. Then, 2 centuries later, a new storm swept in from the west. Alexander the Great of Macedon defeated the Persian Empire and became the new master of the world. Alexander, like Cyrus, was mesmerized by the splendor of Babylon. He had a grand dream, to make Babylon the capital of the global empire he was building, a place where Eastern and Western cultures would merge. But that dream was never realized. In the year 323 BCE, in the very palace of Nebuchadnezzar, Alexander died suddenly of a mysterious fever at the age of just 32. After Alexander's death, his generals divided his empire. One general, Seleucus, took control of Mesopotamia. He built a new Greek-style capital nearby, named Seleucia. The people and the prosperity of Babylon slowly moved to the new city. And Babylon, the great city, began a slow decline that lasted for centuries. Under the later Parthian and Sasanian empires, it grew more and more desolate. The great canals filled with silt, the gardens withered, bricks from the walls and the mighty ziggurats were taken by local people to build their own homes. The desert wind blew through the deserted avenues. The dust slowly buried everything. The city that was once the center of the universe had now returned to dust, sleeping a long sleep beneath the earth. Its history was written in ash. But when was it really? Cities can crumble, empires can vanish, but ideas do not. The legacy of Mesopotamia does not lie in broken bricks or buried palaces. It is not sleeping under the sand. It is alive, it is breathing, and it is present in our own lives today, in ways we rarely notice. Think of the seed of the city. The idea of people giving up a nomadic life to build complex urban communities together, with laws, government, and public works, was first planted in this land between the two rivers. Every city on Earth today, no matter how modern, is a distant descendant of Eridu, Uruk, and Babylon. Think of the seed of writing. From the simple wedge-shaped marks used to count sheep and barley, the Mesopotamians created a system that could record everything: complex laws, immortal epic poems, scientific works, and sacred prayers. They gave humanity its greatest gift, the ability to make thought physical, to make memory permanent. Think of the seed of time. The next time you look at a clock, remember the Babylonian astronomers. It was they, observing the night sky from the tops of their ziggurats, who divided an hour into 60 minutes and a minute into 60 seconds. It was they who divided a circle into 360 degrees. It was they who mapped the 12 constellations of the zodiac that we still know today. They imposed a mathematical order on the universe and on time, an order we still use every single day. Think of the seed of law, the idea that society should be governed by clear written rules, that justice should apply to all, and that a king has a duty to protect the weak from the strong, was carved into the stone pillars of Ur-Nammu and Hammurabi long before any other civilization. And finally, think of the seed of stories. The tale of Gilgamesh, the king who sought immortality only to realize that a person's legacy lies in what they build and leave behind, still moves us to this day. Their story of a great flood has echoed in different cultures all over the world. They were the first to grapple with the great questions of humanity, about life, death, friendship, and meaning, and to write them down for all who would come after. Closing words. Our journey, which began with the whisper of a seed by a river bank, has now reached its end. We have walked through the cities of the gods, witnessed the rise and fall of great empires, and listened to the voices of kings, poets, and ordinary people. The empires of Mesopotamia may have turned to ash, but their legacy has not. It has become a part of the air we breathe, a part of the DNA of human civilization. It is a legacy that does not sleep. Thank you for joining me on this peaceful journey through the cradle of civilization. And now, let the final waves of history gently carry you away. Let your mind drift along the peaceful currents of the Tigris and the Euphrates, the rivers that saw it all. They are still flowing, silent and steady, just like the flow of time, just like your breath, as you drift deeper and deeper into a peaceful sleep. Good night.